Welcome. We're excited to have you here today. We are going to be talking about recovering from holiday spending with some great budget tips for military families. I'm Lizanne Lightfoot. I'm the VP of Marketing at the GoVA Foundation, and I'm excited to have here with me today some experts from C&F Bank in Virginia. Our guest speaker is going to be Mary Schoenfelder, and I am so excited with some of the tips and the advice and the perspective that she brings. So, Mary, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I will let her do a full intro in just a moment. But for those who are just signing in, I wanted you to know that today we're going to be speaking about some budgeting advice, some savings tips, and some really good perspective on anyone who has set a New Year's resolution to make some financial progress this year. I personally have some goals that I'm trying to reach, and C&F Bank is here to tell us how to take some small steps and get closer to those goals. So Mary has a great presentation for you. You can ask questions in the chat feature. You'll see up at the top of your screen, there is a chat bubble. You can click on that to type a question or add a question into the chat. We will be viewing those throughout the session, and then we'll do a live Q&A at the end. So feel free to type responses, feedback, questions for Mary throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure that we get to them shortly. Finally, I wanted to familiarize you with the GoVA Foundation. We are a nonprofit focused on encouraging military families and veterans nationwide with free financial resources. So C&F is one of our great bank sponsors in the Virginia area, but today we are welcoming people from throughout the country to this presentation. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest speaker. Mary, can you tell us a little bit about your perspective and experience with helping people on their budgeting and finances?
Good morning. I am pleased to be here. I just want to let you know that I have been with C&F Bank for 17 years this year, 32 years of banking experience. And although I love doing loans for clients, my passion is around budgeting and savings. That is the core foundation. So I never want anybody to ever hear, unfortunately, we can't do this loan for you today, because they're not in a good place. I also don't want to see people not be able to enjoy life, that they're working solely just for their expenses and they don't have money for vacations and Christmases and worrying about how they're going to send their kids to college. And so I'm pleased to be able to share with you some ideas and some tips that I share with my customers on a daily basis.
Excellent. Well, we are so grateful to have you here with us today and have your experience and perspective. So I did want to start out by asking our audience, since we're talking about recovering from holiday spending and we are at the beginning of the new year, how many of you have set some type of New Year's resolution related to saving more, paying down debt, any type of financial goals that you have for the year? We want to hear what those are so that we can help you to get closer to them. And I will share a little bit of mine. One of my New Year's resolutions is to help our household budget get a little bit more balanced. My husband recently retired from the military after serving 23 years in the Marine Corps. So he does have a retirement pension and disability pay, but it is a change from what he had as his active duty status pay. So it's quite a budget reset for our household. And we want to kind of spend the year getting things more in line and understanding and getting more perspective on what that looks like. So I'm here certainly interested in Mary's tips, trying to get some clarity and steps forward on that. But we want to hear from you if there are particular goals that you are featuring and working through for this year. So with that, I want to go ahead and get the presentation up on screen so that we can talk a little bit about the budgeting and savings topics today. And I also want to make sure that we can introduce C&F Bank, who is our sponsor for this presentation. So Cheryl will go ahead and tell you a little bit about the bank.
Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Macy, and I am our community event specialist at C&F Bank. I'm in our marketing department, and I'm very passionate about financial education for the community at large. So a little quick background about C&F Bank. We are a local community bank that has been in business almost 100 years. Coming up the end of this month, we are celebrating our 99th birthday. So we've been around for a while, and and we are very experienced. We are really focused on guiding the people around us towards success. That is our mission, on helping you, build lives worth living. Kind of going back to what Mary said earlier today, we want to make sure that we understand where you are in your financial journey and where you need to go to get there. So I think that this introduction, what Mary's going to share today, is really going to help you with that, and we're excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And GoVA Foundation is excited to have CNF as a sponsor as well. So our foundation was established with a military and veteran employee group that is really focused on providing the financial resources that we all wish we had earlier in military life. I shared a little bit about my family's perspective, and I know that all of our team members at GoVA, they really want us to have the empowerment, the confidence, and the control to make great choices with our finances. So that's why we turn to experts like Mary here from CNF Bank to talk about some of the things that we need to face. And the first thing we want to address today is spending money. I know that with this topic of holiday spending, we are just a few weeks after the major holidays of 2025. A lot of us are still recovering from some of those expenses last month. And when I did some research, I found that the average American accumulated around $1,200 in credit card debt just related to holiday spending last month. Mary, I don't know if that surprises you at all or if that's something that you're seeing every year, but for those of us, especially veteran families that might be dealing with the additional cost of traveling long distances to visit people over the holidays, or active duty families who are dealing with PCS moves during that season, what are some tips that you would offer from CNF to help us recover from overspending in that month of December?
Sure. So for many of my clients, they spend with their heart and not with their head during the holidays. And so what I suggest to all of my clients is you're more likely to hit your goals and stay on track when you have an account for a very specific purpose. So when we sit down and talk about budgeting, we want to actually figure out what we can afford to spend on Christmas, what we can afford to spend on vacation. And vacation is can be very broad for some people. Some people, it could be just going somewhere for a weekend. Some people want to go somewhere for a week. Some people just want to buy a season's pass to an amusement park. So vacation, can be something very different. But your numbers don't lie. And so when I say sitting down with a budget, the first thing you need to start out with is figuring out what are your defined expenses that you have to pay every single month, and what can we afford to set aside into a separate account for Christmas on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, so that when that time comes around, you don't feel the guilt of taking money out of your emergency savings or your household spending account, but yet you had an account that was set aside specifically for Christmas. Taking that money out, putting it on a gift card, and using that when you're actually doing your holiday shopping. And when it's gone, it's gone. If you don't do it that way and you're using a credit card, again, you're spending emotionally and not analytically the way you should be doing it. And therefore, Christmas is over and you spent twice as much money as you probably thought you should have, but it's hard to put ketchup back in the bottle. So sitting down at least once every 3 to 4 months and making sure that you're on track with your budget is very, very important. And let me just preface by saying budget is not a naughty word. Really what budget is telling your money where you want it to go instead of trying to sit down and figure out where it went. Now, obviously, you can see on your screen here that there's debit options using checks, debit card, online banking, bill pay, things of that sort. So, again, making sure that you're utilizing your online banking and setting up automatic transfers so that when your pay comes in, a certain amount goes to cover all of your expenses in one account, and a certain amount goes to those other accounts that we've mentioned, so that when the holidays come up, you have it there and you feel good about what you're able to spend, and you're able to allocate it to the people that you care, most about.
Absolutely. I think that's a great perspective to have a separate account that's really earmarked visibly for those major expenses. We all want to be able to spend comfortably for the holidays and shower people with our love and our gifts and all the things. But you're right that sometimes there needs to be a visible limit. And if it's all coming out of one giant slush fund, that you might also be pulling from your vacations, and you might also be pulling from home repairs, and if the car breaks or whatever, then you're not truly seeing where that money goes in a visible way. So that's one great tip that Mary has just shared with us. And for those who have joined, we are talking about how to recover from holiday spending and doing kind of a budget reset early in the year. So if anyone has financial goals and New Year's resolutions that they're working on this year, you can feel free to share those in the chat. The chat bubble is the top of your screen. And as you share those, we'll be happy to address any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. But Mary, also when you were talking about how obviously debit and credit is one of the ways that we can spend our money. I know with our kids, we're always telling them, if you're going to use a credit card, use it only in the way that you could pay it off in full so that you're not incurring all of those expenses, which is great advice. But for a lot of adults on a practical level, when either large expenses come up for the holidays or if emergencies come up, it ends up being that credit card might be the only way that you can pay for things. And I saw a survey recently that unfortunately said around 1/3 of military families have less than $500 in savings. That is a reality for a lot of us. I know that we had a government shutdown in the fall where luckily, most of the military was paid throughout that experience, but a lot of people were not. And the reality of missing even one paycheck can be a severe detriment to families. So what would you share with your customers who maybe don't have money in savings? They can't pay off a credit card in full. How can they take that next step toward their savings goals?
So sitting down and really analyzing where your money is going first is the most important part. I've sat down with clients many, many times before. They've listed what their expenses are, such as their mortgage, their electricity, their cell phone, and so forth like that. And when we get to the end, it seems like there's an excess amount of money left over. And what I have found is you really don't know where your money is actually going because you're not tracking it. So going back to the tip of having an account for a specific purpose, having an account that you use for your everyday transactions with a debit card associated with it versus having one that's strictly for your bills where you have automatic deductions coming out of it or doing bill pays for those types of things is very important. Because when you sit down and look at your balances, and let's just say you're standing in line at Starbucks or Chick-fil-A, and all of your money is commingled between your household expenses and your everyday expenses. It's hard to know how much extra you actually have for frivolous spending. However, if you have money set aside into a debit card account, you'll know if you can afford to spend $6 to $10 at Starbucks or whatever it may be at Chick-fil-A. So going back to how do you prepare for emergency savings is knowing what's going in and what's going out for sure, and making sure that it's allocated in the right spots, but also figuring out what your monthly expenses are. And then what I typically do for my clients is I multiply that figure. So let's say, for example, your monthly expenses are $2,000. At a minimum, you should have 3 months worth of expense money in your emergency savings. So if you multiply that, that's $6,000. Most of my clients will actually arbitrarily pull a number out of the sky and say, I'm saving up $3,000 or I'm trying to save up $5,000. It should ultimately be 3 to 6 months worth whatever your expenses are. So then what I typically will tell them to do is create a 5-year plan. So take that $6,000, divide it by 60 months, and set aside $100 a month or $50 every 2 weeks or $25 a week. When you can break it down incrementally like that, most of us can give up going out to eat at Chick-fil-A or going to Starbucks once or twice a week to be able to allocate $25 a week into a savings plan. Secondly, I would say It's important to set up a home equity line of credit because you never know when those emergencies are actually going to happen. And if you can tap into a home equity line of credit when there's a large emergency, you can pay that back over time, as opposed to a higher interest rate on a credit card and feeling like you have to pay it off immediately. Now, some of the credit card companies out there will allow you to do what's called extend-a-pay. So if you had to put, like, say, tires on your vehicle, or you had to replace the hot water tank in your house, you can actually spread it out over a 6-month plan with a fixed interest rate. So look for opportunities where, when those emergencies come up, if you don't have the money in the savings plan because you're just starting that plan right now in January, look for opportunities for either an equity line or an extended pay credit card that will allow you to minimize your interest on it.
For sure. I think that's a couple of great tips right there. I mean, first of all, just the perspective of breaking those goals down into smaller bite-sized pieces. I mean, we all know that we should have several months of savings in an account, but looking at that sheer number, you threw out 6,000. Most of us are not able to just accumulate a $6,000 savings account by next week. So it's really going to take some time and some consistency and really those small actions that we can make to take that next step forward. I think it's really helpful to break goals down into something that actually makes sense for you and for your family on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, so that you can see that progress. You're getting closer to your goal, and it doesn't feel so intimidating and unachievable. And I know that we've had a lot of good feedback from our members on the Edge. Saving and budgeting is one of the top concerns and one of the top reasons that people come to the Edge looking for financial resources. And we've had really great feedback about how people have made small change, little adjustments, learning about how their finances work, getting more visibility on where their spending is going. And those small changes add up very quickly to big differences. We've seen people that were able to, propose to their boyfriend and girlfriend and take a vacation or plan a honeymoon. We've seen families that were able to pay down debt and start sending kids to college when a few years ago that had all seemed very unachievable for them. So we really want to celebrate with our members. And I'd love to hear from those who are watching live today, are there big dreams and goals that you've set for yourself or your family? Is there a major financial event, whether it's a vacation or a purchase that you've been saving up for or that your family is excited about? And are there some steps that you're taking to help you get there? We'd love to hear what's working for other military families and get some tangible tips for you. But also, Mary, I heard you mention that there's flexible ways to pay things off when we are faced with some large unexpected expenses. And I know for many military families, that can come in the form of PCS costs. Yes, there's some reimbursement from the government on the other end of a PCS move, but there's often a lot of upfront payments out of pocket. And sometimes there's a long delay on that government credit card on when it can actually be paid back. So we have definitely had to dip into our emergency savings for PCS moves. And of course, it seemed like every time my husband deployed overseas is when we'd have the car would break or something in the home. I did have to replace a hot water heater on my own, which I discovered I needed to do when there was water leaking all over our basement. So these things happen, whether you're a homeowner, whether you're a parent. I mean, there's just always going to be big expenses in life. So I'm wondering, for anyone that's watching today and has set a resolution of saving more and getting started, how can you help them to get closer to those goals?
Setting up automatic transfers is going to ensure that it happens. Manually, we just don't do it. I'll give you a prime example. Going to church every Sunday, I rarely ever carry a checkbook anymore. I don't know anybody that does. And I didn't have cash on me to tithe, and I didn't have my checkbook with me to tithe. And so I said, next Sunday, I'll just double up on it. But does that happen? So if you forget to put money aside into your savings account, do you take care of yourself? Do you double up and make sure that you've paid yourself? Most of us don't. But if you actually set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your emergency savings account or to the other accounts that I've mentioned prior, as a systematic, it's going to happen. Just like you have to pay for your electric bill every single month. Do you have that set up under automatic? Most of us do set up a lot of things under automatic or doing it through bill pay. Why not do it for yourself as well? And by sitting down and figuring out what you can afford to set aside into it, you're less likely to put a bunch of money into savings and then a week later having to take a bunch of money back out of it. So automatic transfers work. It's important for you to sit down and figure out what needs to go into these savings buckets, whether it's for home repairs, emergencies, or the like, and then figure out how your bills go around that. And the biggest thing I will say is sitting down and writing out every single thing that your money goes to. You can sit and figure out what you can eliminate. I have found that so many people have subscriptions out there that they didn't even realize that they still had. And those subscriptions, if you cancel them out, that could be your $25 a week that could go into savings very easily. Are you utilizing Apple Music, or are you utilizing Uber Eats as much as you think? And can you eliminate these things to be able to pay yourself first? And the second bullet point on there, talking about paying bills on time, credit is so important, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but when a derogatory piece of credit hits your credit report, that means that you've been late 30 days or longer. It stays on your credit for 7 years. It takes a really long time for your credit to rebound from a mistake. So setting up automatic transfers for your bills to make sure that even just your minimum payments come out on time will protect you in the long run. But like I said, I think setting up automatic transfers, whether it's for debts or for savings, it's very important. It's going to keep you on track.
I think that's so smart. And we saw Cheryl in the comments was giving an example of that she sets up an automatic transfer on payday to put directly into her savings account. And then that way you don't even see it. You're not missing that money as long as you've allocated your budget so that you can, of course, cover all your other needs and your bills. I agree that if you can kind of take that money out and set it aside before it even hits your overall account, you learn to live without it. And then you're building up that very nice padding for what you've determined as a family are your goals and your priorities and what you really want to be working towards. So
absolutely. When you have an account that's labeled for a very specific reason, you can look at that and feel rewarded for your hard work. And that's really what it's all about, is feeling successful for what it is that you're doing.
For sure. We all need to see that progress. You know, financial change does not happen overnight. Saving for a major expense is not going to happen by next week. But if we can kind of give ourselves that visual progress and satisfaction and feelings of accomplishment, then it's going to motivate you that much more to keep on going and to maybe make some sacrifices or to, cancel some of those subscriptions. I've definitely been guilty of paying for subscriptions at duty stations where we no longer lived. And sometimes we had to go and review the credit card statement a month or so afterwards and realize, they hit us for a couple extra months and we needed to cancel that before we left the state. So absolutely, I encourage people to do regular audits of, what subscriptions do you have? What is popping up on your credit card bill? Did you realize that you were still paying for that? And is it still a priority for you? And obviously, budgeting is going to be the part of this where we see all of your tips and your advice here really come together. So I'm excited to hear from you about budgeting tips today. And I did want to talk about some practical ways that we can be recovering from holiday spending, setting ourselves up to make good progress and good choices in 2026. And I'll share some perspective that I think a lot of our military and veteran families can relate to. When my husband was active duty, we definitely found that it was difficult to keep a consistent budget, partially because we were moving so often and different duty stations had different costs of living. So those who are watching, I don't know if you experienced that too, but we lived in low cost of living areas where our money went much further. We could go out to eat more often or do family activities. And then we've also been in high cost cost of living areas like Southern California, where we would joke that just stepping outside the door and breathing the air seemed to cost our family $100. So really expensive to go anywhere or do anything. And in fact, our family even qualified for WIC vouchers for groceries, even though my husband had served for 10 years in the military, just because it was such a ridiculously high cost of living, and we had 4 children while we were living there. So for those families who might feel that they've kind of been in a budget whiplash or juggling PCS moves and deployments and kind of these inconsistencies of military life, how can you get back on track? And what would you say to military and veteran families who really want to build a stable budget this year?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to sit down at the end of the year as a family unit and be able to discuss things that are going to come up in 2026. For example, if you knew for a fact that your car was not going to pass state inspection because you needed tires on there, well, as a girl, I'm never looking at the tires. I'm just looking at the gas meter. Do I have enough gas in there? And is my oil light coming on? I don't look at all those other things, So sitting down and talking about, is that going to be an expense? And for me, the tires is not really a pretty expense, but it is something that's very necessary, and it could be a couple $1,000s, and talking about maybe, hey, I really would like a gazebo on the back deck for shade because it's just too hot to sit out there and enjoy the deck. But if you're sitting down as a family unit and saying, this is what's really important for 2026, and building it into that budget plan right away, it's going to happen. But if you're just wishing and thinking about it, but don't have a defined plan, it's never going to come to fruition. So sitting down and talking about what is it as a family that we can eliminate, and what is it as a family that we'd really like to set money aside for, and giving examples of the wants and the needs. The tires versus, the gazebo so that you can sit outside and it's not so sunny out there. It's just a one example of those things. But also knowing that your HVAC system maybe is already 10 years old, or other things in the house that you're just going to have to set aside money for that because it is getting old, and sitting and thinking about those things. But if you're not doing it, it's going to catch up to you. So, I looked at the Edge, and I'm thoroughly impressed with all the tools that are actually out there. And there's so many different areas through C&F Bank and through the Edge for the tools, but I don't want it to be too complicated for you. So just, if you would, when you're initially starting with this, just take out a piece of paper and start writing down, hey, this is my rent, or this is my mortgage payment, this is my electricity, this is my cell phone. Just start putting all of those things out there so you can actually talk about it as a family unit, about where the money's actually going. Sitting down and talking about, what are you budgeting for gas and groceries? Oh my gosh, those are 2 expenses that seem like they're never ending, and you never have anything really to show for it. And talking about grocery shopping, one of the biggest tips that I have learned for myself, and I share it with my clients all the time, is when you go into the grocery store with a list, that's great. But when you get inside the grocery store, you have the end caps that are like buy one, get one free. And you get that shiny syndrome going on where, oh my gosh, that smells so good in the deli, let me pick that up. And before you know it, you've actually probably spent $50 to $60 more in that grocery store than you went in there with. And so the tip I give you is, online grocery shopping is wonderful for lots of reasons. One, you can actually sit out and create your meal plan for the week. You can look at your spices and see what it is that you have and what you need to purchase and don't need to purchase, going through your cabinets and figuring those types of things out. You can go online and you can clip all the digital coupons, which is so easy, to actually do. And then you can go through each category and put in all your dairy products, all your vegetables, and so forth at one time. The important thing about it is you're able to look at your grocery cart as you're going along. So if, as a family unit, you said, I'm going to spend no more than $200 or $250 a week on groceries, you can look at that cart and determine if it's going in the direction that you want it to go. No one in a grocery store ever puts anything back when they're in line, and the cashier now tells you that it's $286, right? So
Right.
that has helped me tremendously stay on track. And if I can cut expenses through grocery shopping and better meal prepping, that's more money that can go towards paying off debt and more money that can go towards savings plans.
Absolutely. I love that tip, partially as a mom that has spent a lot of time in the grocery store with toddlers and being distracted. And I'm not able to always compare the prices and make the best choices when I'm just grabbing things off the shelf. But I love the
Absolutely.
intentionality that you have there, the visibility, right? That you're not just throwing things into the cart and saying, "Oh yeah, we need this. I forgot I was out of that," or I'm pretty sure I need to stock up on this one. But instead, you're being very purposeful about the family's allocated this funding. How is that being spent? And if we had set a goal of, say, $200 a week, and I'm noticing that that online cart is consistently over, well, are there too many things in the cart, or is our budget unrealistic and needs some adjustment? And that can help you like have some conversations in an informed way rather than just pointing fingers at each other and saying, you spend too much on groceries, you spend too much here. So I think those are all just really great ways to help people get visibility of where their money is going, allocate things according to their priorities, and really make the decisions that are going to make the most sense for their family. And I'm so glad to hear that you explored the tools on the Edge and really enjoyed some of the budgeting tools that we have. All of you who are on this call here as members of the Edge, you get access to hundreds of financial resources for free. GoVA provides these to military families nationwide. And this budget tool worksheet will be available as a download that I'll be sending out in the follow-up email. So if you're watching this live or if you've registered for this call, you will be getting this resource as a follow-up. But please, if you're an Edge member, you can sign on to the Edge and check out a huge variety. I think we have almost 100 different tools and articles and videos related to budgeting. We also have an interactive budget tool that I like because instead of it being, laid out like this, like a somewhat intimidating spreadsheet or a list, it's just these easy sliders that you can adjust. And you might think that you spend this much on gas or groceries, but you can easily slide it up or down to accommodate with your household budget. And it saves your progress, so you don't have to put everything in all at once. You can do a couple items, log out, come back later and pick it right back up. So it doesn't have to be such an overwhelming, intimidating process. But I'll make sure that as a follow-up, everyone can get access to the budget tools that Mary mentioned here. But I do want to hear a little bit more about how you'd recommend people can go about starting a budget. Obviously, we all know the basics, but sometimes just taking that step and getting it going in a way that's going to work for our family continually throughout the year, we need a little bit of emphasis. So do you have any tips to help people really stick with it or to make good choices when they're starting budgeting for the first time?
It's very important as a family unit that you have the same goals, because if one person is working towards one and somebody else is not on board, it's typically going to be very difficult. So once again, I think it's very important as families eat together. I think it's important for families to be able to sit down and talk about money together. And so understanding exactly what you have to work with. I have clients that he has a checking account, she has a checking account, and then they have a joint account. And that's okay, because that way they can actually spend their allocated funds in their account the way they see fit. But both of them can visually, transparently be able to see the money that's coming into the household expenses and where the money's actually going. And so I think it's very important for you to determine how much money are we working with to be able to cover the wants and the needs, and what account is being used for full transparency. So there's no arguing about where the finances are actually going. And then how far do you need your budget to go? Well, I actually like to plan it out, monthly and see how things go like that. But what I also do is I know for myself, we have personal property taxes that come out once a year, and we have real estate taxes that come out twice a year. If you're not taking what that dollar amount is and incorporating it as a monthly expense,
Mhm.
When it happens, it's a huge lump sum, and it causes so much anxiety to a lot of my clients that they feel like they have to pull money out of emergency savings, or they have to pay it with a credit card. So looking at expenses that are not just monthly, but looking at expenses throughout the year. Some of our expenses are quarterly. Just break it down to a monthly amount on your spreadsheet. Annual, break it down as a monthly amount, because only what's going to come out of there is what needs to come out of there. But when it's time for that quarterly payment or that semi-annual payment, you have the funds already built into that savings because you've been, that household checking account, because you've been allocating it every single month into there. And then make informed choices for deals, bargains, and coupons. Again, how many of us have gone on to Amazon to see if they could find something cheaper than they could find it at Walmart, when they were in the store? We all do it. Look for opportunities. A lot of companies will actually match other people's ads. And then another example of a helpful tip is, there's a grocery store here where I live that if you pick up your groceries on Friday online, you actually get 4 times the amount of points that you can use towards gasoline. So if you're spending $200 a week on groceries, but you pick them up on Friday, you're going to get 800 points. That's the equivalent of 80 cents off of gas per gallon. I don't know about you, but if I could save 80 cents off on my gasoline just because I picked up my groceries on a Friday versus a Saturday, it's worth it. Does it take effort and planning? Absolutely. But they're designed to give you those 4 times the amount of points for it, because they know that their store is really busy on Saturdays and Sundays, because that's when most people have time to do it. So if you're planning accordingly and putting all of your items in online and then hitting that you want to pick it up on Friday, you're going to get a huge bargain, both for your budget for gasoline expenses, as well as you keep up your weekends for free and you don't have to worry about that task.
That's wonderful. That's a really smart tip. And I would love to hear if anyone else has maybe lesser known tips or local benefits that they've found similar to the grocery delivery that Mary just mentioned. But if you have a favorite budgeting and saving idea that has worked really well in your household, please share it so that we can all benefit and take advantage of that. But I did want to go back to what you had mentioned on allocating budgets for your bills over time. I know when we first got married, we definitely made that mistake of looking at just 1 month of credit card spending and thinking that that was our spending, that was our budget, and trying to work with that. And then a few months later, the annual insurance bill hit. And I think we pay that one biannually now, but paying 6 months worth of insurance for the cars all at once was a huge chunk and something that we had not appropriately budgeted for. So I definitely encourage families to take a hard look at those big either once a year expenses or twice a year. Mary mentioned that sometimes things are quarterly, but it doesn't help you at all to say that it surprised you or that the bill came up unexpectedly. You know that it's going to hit again next month or 6 months from now or next year. So let's make sure that you're budgeting properly moving forward. It'll save you a lot of headache and a lot of worry and hopefully a lot of spending on your credit card if you can allocate for those things in advance. And as we're wrapping up today, I know we do have some questions in the chat. We will definitely get to those in a moment. I have loved some of the tips that Mary has shared, but if you have a favorite tip that she's mentioned today, or if you have questions about anything that she has brought up, please feel free to ask that in the chat, and we'll be getting to those questions in just a moment. So Mary, I know that CNF wanted to talk about some ways that people can track their spending and some of the tools that the bank has built to help them with that. So can you tell us a little bit more about those opportunities?
Sure. Online banking is a necessity these days. What I really like most about online banking is if I get an electric bill and I see that it's $186, I can actually go back and I can look at every payment I've actually done through online bill pay for Dominion Virginia Power, and I can actually see what I've actually been spending. So yes, you get your bill, and generally they'll tell you what kilowatts you actually use this December versus last December. But it's important to actually look at the dollar amount of what you're paying, because winter cost for electricity is higher than summer cost, or vice versa, depending on where you actually live. And so what I've been able to do is set up my own budget plan, so to speak, for Virginia Power. And so I send them $230. Actually, I send them $115 every 2 weeks is what I do. And so when my electric bill is high in the summertime because of AC cost and so forth, and that bill comes in and it's $400 and some, I don't have to panic, because I built up a credit with Dominion Virginia Power because I've been sending them $115 every 2 weeks. And so I'm able to go in there through online banking, look at every payment that I actually did for Virginia Power, add them all up, divide it by 12, and figure out if my $115 every 2 weeks is going to suffice for 2026, or do I need to increase that to $120 every 2 weeks? And I just use Virginia Power as an example, but the same thing with your cell phone bills, same thing with your car insurance and things of that. You can actually set up your budget by understanding what your last 12 months of expenses have actually been. You can go in there and look at it that way.
It's really smart. I just wanted to add that there are so many military families that move to different climates where the heating and the air conditioning and the energy bills are going to be dramatically different. And I have certainly been surprised myself, and I know many other families that have been in that situation where, you know, the winter heat bill comes around and no one was expecting to pay $600 in a month for that particular bill. Or in your example, the summer air conditioning is going to be twice as much as the rest of the year. So there are companies that will offer to do that for you by averaging it out over the year, but usually you've had to live in that area for 12 months to get that average. But Mary's suggesting a way that you could also just do it yourself manually by looking at the expenses, maybe getting some feedback from neighbors about what their averages are for different seasons, and prepare accordingly so that you don't get hit with that really high bill and have to figure out how to make that work in the middle of the season.
E-statements is extremely important. Fraud is on the rise more than ever. We've seen it in so many different areas of fraud. So e-statements allows you to be able to maintain all of your statements online. Your statements tell a lot about you, your family, what it is that you like to do, where your expenses are. It'll show if you have a car payment, a mortgage payment, things of that sort. There's no locks on our mailboxes at the end of our driveways, only if you're paying for a post office box. So I would encourage you to set up electronic statements for your credit cards, electronic statements for your bank accounts, save some trees, but also protect yourself from fraud. And then mobile banking with alerts, oh my goodness gracious, to be able to set up an alert that tells you if your account falls below whatever threshold you want to set it. Allowing you to know when your direct deposit hits, allowing you to know if your debit card has been used, allowing you to know if your account goes into a negative balance. You know, this is your way of actually being a good steward of your funds and being able to know exactly what's going on. We all live in a very fast-paced world, and we live on our social media, we live on our cell phones, we live by everything electronic. You need to make sure that you're being alerted when something goes wrong. Because of fraud, you have a window of time that you can actually report it. And so if you have a debit card transaction came through that you didn't do, that's your opportunity to be able to report for fraud. But again, maintaining your funds. If you know for a fact that you want to maintain at least a couple $1,000s in your savings account, and for whatever reason it dropped down, it's sending you an alert. Or same thing with your checking account. If you're wanting to keep a cushion in there and it drops down that amount, emotionally and mentally, it will prepare you that the frivolous spending may need to calm down or something needs to change. And you go back and re-look at your budgets all over again.
That's a great perspective too, I think. And that actually helps to address one of the questions that I had seen in our chat. So I did want to open up the floor to any feedback or any questions that you have for Mary. She talked a lot at the beginning about different ways that we can moderate our spending and keep track of what we're spending. We've talked about budgeting and some ways to get good visibility and setting goals as a family. And she's had some really practical tips too. I love your tip for doing your grocery shopping online so that you have that clear visibility of what's in your cart and a little bit of control over some impulse spending. And you've had some great tips on I think how we've used credit cards and debit and all of this. So I want to hear from our audience what have been your favorite tips today. And then I do want to go back to some questions that we had. So Kimberly was asking, how would you suggest, Mary, staying on budget if you have a spouse that constantly wants to spend a little bit here, a little bit there all the time? And she clarified that in her situation, there is an income difference. She's actually making more than the spouse in this scenario. So you have one person who, well, I guess basically both people have different views on the spending priorities and on what the budget should be. How do you recommend that a couple come to an agreement and a more stable solution in that situation?
Absolutely. So I'm currently a widow. I was married for 30 years, and my husband and I had this golden rule going into our marriage. We didn't have a whole lot of assets, but we also didn't have a whole lot of liabilities. But we had a golden rule that if you spent more than $100, you really needed to talk to the other person about it. It was a respect factor. As time went on, we were using one account, and he hated using the debit card personally, especially if it was for something that was $2 or $3. He felt silly. He'd like to have cash in his pocket. So he would go to the ATM, and the balance on the account might have been, $4,000, $5,000 in there because the mortgage payment hadn't come out. Well, it was nothing for him to take $100, out of the bank account. And he would hold on to these ATM receipts. And I was sitting down balancing my checkbook. And I would say, did you go to the ATM a few times this week? And he'd pull out 3 or 4 receipts. And he's like, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. And so that's where I decided at that point in our marriage that nobody wants to have an allowance. They really don't, okay? But you need to have one account for the household expenditure so that you know that the baseline is being covered, right? And so having a separate account for everyday spending, going to the ATM, using your debit card and things like that, whether you have one jointly between your husband and yourself or your partner, or you have one separately. That's what worked for our family. Was I set money aside strictly into the household account so that when he went and pulled up the ATM balance for our everyday spending, it might only show $400 or $500 in there. He would never take $100 because that's all that was in there, right? So he might take, 25 or 50 or something like that out of it. And he would say, hey, by the way, I took $50 out of the everyday spending account. I'm like, that's fine. That's what it's there for. But it kept it where we were both being mutually respected with one another. And we knew that we always had our bases covered with our expenditures. And again, it's really important to talk about what those expenses are because, again, I don't really know a whole lot about oil changes and car repairs and things like that, but he doesn't really understand what grocery costs are and what costs are for kids' clothes and things like that. We all have our different perspectives. So if you're sitting down and you're talking about it, I would say at least quarterly, if not once every 6 months, about what our expenses look like. It's important for your partner to understand what the cost is associated with those things, because there are people that you could ask right now, what is the cost of a gallon of milk? And they couldn't tell you.
Right. Or what's the current balance in your account? And, who's going to get it correct down to the dollar. So I think respect is definitely the underlying value there that you want to come back to. And I'd also encourage Kimberly and anyone else in that situation that we do have a money personality assessment on the edge that people have found really helpful in this situation, because it's very common for a saver to marry a spender and then to spend the rest of their lives trying to discuss in sometimes heated terms on where their money should be going. And what we've learned on the edge is that people have a variety of money personalities. There's not just one right way to view spending or to view saving. And we actually have a combination. It's kind of like a personality quiz that you might take in any magazine or online assessment. It's just a couple of minutes and a few questions, but it really gives you great insight into some of the maybe prejudices or the habits or the way that you grew up viewing money. We all have these habits baked into us for good or for bad. Some people are very future oriented, and they're going to have a much easier time looking at the big picture, looking at their overall goals, delaying gratification now because I want to reach something in the future. And other people just are not as future minded, and they're going to need to discuss money or to view it and prioritize it in a different way. So I think if you and your spouse each take that assessment, it'll give you some common ground to understand how to speak to each other in a respectful way, in a way that you're both going to be getting back to your core values, but also understanding that, there's not just one right or wrong way to view a financial situation, but the way that we view spending money and saving money is often influenced by the way that we grew up or the people around us or the experiences that we've had. So hopefully that money personality assessment on the edge will be some really great insights for all of you. And it does also then recommend resources particular to that personality to speak to the individual in the way that's going to resonate best with them. So I love that aspect of the edge, how we can personalize it. And then I see there's also a question from Aisha. She's asking, would you recommend paying off a high credit card bill if you have the money sitting around in savings and emergency funds? Or, Mary, is it better to make monthly payments until that bill is paid off? What do you think about the pros and cons there?
Well, one of the programs that we offer at C&F Bank will allow you to hang on to your cash reserves and do what's called a cash secured loan. And it's 3% over whatever your investment is paying. So, for example, if your investment is paying 3% on your savings, then you could actually get a 6% loan. However, your money is still earning that 3%. So technically, you're getting a 3% loan. So you could do a loan against it to actually take the money, pay off the credit card, and then just pay the secured loan back at a much lower interest rate at the pace that your budget will actually allow. Secondly, if you're not wanting to do something like that, you never want to deplete your cash reserves because it's a vicious cycle when it comes to using the credit card. You'll actually take all that money from your cash reserves and pay off that credit card, and then you don't have a whole lot of cash reserves left over, so now you're using the credit card over again. So It's a vicious cycle.
I see. So do you think there's a compromise where you could make a certain payment on the credit card that would use some of that cash reserve so you're not getting those high interest rates, but finding a way to maximize the balance of those two accounts?
So earlier I mentioned that you could actually do extend-to-pay. So if you can go in and look at some of your larger purchases that you did on the credit card, you can select those particular purchases and they'll actually give you a reduced interest rate and will allow you to pay it over, let's say, for example, a 12-month period of time at a much lower interest rate. So that's a great option. Balance transfers are available for our clients who want to have 0% for 24 months. So you could actually transfer a balance onto a card and then pay it off over a 24-month period of time at 0% interest. That is definitely helpful, but cash is king. Don't deplete your cash reserves. Let's just do it the smart way.
I love that. And Aisha said that she loves your recommendation as well. So thank you, Mary. You have shared some incredible tips with us today. I'll give everyone one last moment. If there's any other feedback or advice or questions that you have for Mary, And then I did want to read a comment from Aisha. She asked, you guys offer these types of virtual classes monthly. These are amazing and so beneficial. So thank you for taking the time to put these together. Yes, we don't have it quite on a monthly schedule, but I will say that GoVA has partnered with banks throughout the country, like CNF, who's our presenter today. So there will sometimes be additional opportunities and digital events coming your way. As an EDGE member, you get exclusive access to these banking experts where you can ask your questions to them directly. CNF will be doing future presentations for us as well. So we will certainly advertise and let you know when the next event is coming up. But we are so honored to have had Mary's experience here today. On behalf of GoVA, I want to thank both Mary and Cheryl and the whole CNF team for putting this presentation together and for really connecting directly with our military members, not just in Virginia, but also nationwide. So thanks so much for sharing your expertise, your budgeting, and your saving tips. I have learned a lot today. I hope that our viewers have too. And Mary, do you have any closing words for the audience?
I will say that finances are a generational curse. If you've never learned how to do things efficiently or effectively, you can break the cycle. You can break the cycle. At CNF Bank, our relationship review process is in line for us to be able to meet with our clients and discuss what's working, what's not working, and help you adjust. We can do that every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever works best for you. But that generational curse can actually be broken. You just have to have a different mindset about what's important and, you know, in life in terms of where you want your money to go. I have so many people that have said to me over the years, I wish I could afford a vacation, or I wish I could afford a car. You can. You just have to figure out how you're spending your money and doing it a little bit differently. That's all. And at CNF Bank, I'm here to help you. I have clients in multiple states, started out in Virginia, have moved and still do business with me. So I encourage you, Lizanne, to give them my email address and my work number. And I can certainly help any client you want virtually, in person, over the phone, whatever works for you. I'm here to help.
Thank you. That is so generous, Mary, and I really appreciate you connecting with our EDGE members that way. Yes, I will be sending out Mary's contact info in the follow-up email, so look for that and feel free to message her and call her if you have additional questions. This has been a great session today. Thank you so much to CNF Bank for all that you do to support our community, especially those in the military and our veteran families. So appreciate your support. GoVA Foundation is here with your free financial education resources. And so I encourage all of you to sign into your EDGE account. I'll send that link in the email as well. Please access your EDGE account today, explore some of these resources that are being provided for you. And I hope that 2026 will be the year that we can all take that next step forward, break some of that previous curse that Mary was talking about, and really make a brighter future for all of our community members. So thank you so much for your time today.